Detective Ray Morrison had pulled over thousands of drivers in his 18-year career, and this late-night stop seemed like just another routine power play until the woman stepped out of the car. But what Detective Morrison didn't know was that Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't just any citizen driving through his jurisdiction. She was a former Army intelligence colonel who had just finished a classified briefing at the Pentagon, and she was about to teach him the difference between authority and respect in ways that would end his career. It was 2:17 a.m. on Interstate 64 outside Richmond, Virginia, when Detective Ray Morrison spotted the black sedan with out-of-state plates. The driver was maintaining perfect speed, signaling properly, following every traffic law to the letter. But that didn't matter to Morrison. Something about the car, or maybe just his mood that night, made him flip on his lights. Welcome to Mysterious Human Stories. Before we dive into this shocking tale of abuse of power meeting its match, tell me in the comments, from which city around the world are you watching today? And if you believe that real authority doesn't need to intimidate, hit that subscribe button. What you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Detective Morrison had built his reputation on intimidation. At 45, with 18 years on the Richmond police force, he moved through his jurisdiction like a man who owned it. His fellow officers whispered about his methods, the way he could escalate a simple traffic stop into something much more serious, how he always found probable cause when he needed it, and how complaints against him mysteriously disappeared. Tonight was no different. The sedan pulled over immediately when his lights came on, parking perfectly on the shoulder with hazards flashing. Professional, by-the-book behavior that somehow irritated Morrison even more. He approached the driver's side with his usual swagger, flashlight in one hand, the other resting casually on his weapon. Through the slightly tinted window, he could make out a woman, Asian, mid-40s, wearing what looked like a business suit, even at this late hour. "License and registration," he barked without preamble, no greeting, no explanation for the stop. The woman rolled down her window calmly, keeping her hands visible. "Good evening, officer. May I ask the reason for this stop?" Morrison's jaw tightened. He hated questions. "License and registration, now." "Of course," she replied evenly. "I'm reaching into my purse for my license and the glove compartment for registration." Her movements were deliberate, controlled, the kind of precise behavior that comes from training. She handed over the documents with steady hands. Morrison examined the license with his flashlight. Dr. Sarah Chen, address in McLean, Virginia, government area. That explained the late hour and the expensive car. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "I'm sorry, officer, but I need to understand the basis for this stop. I wasn't speeding, wasn't driving erratically. What traffic violation am I suspected of?" Morrison stepped closer to the window, using his size to intimidate. "I said step out of the vehicle. That's not a request." Dr. Chen remained calm, but something shifted in her posture. 25 years of military training doesn't just disappear because you put on civilian clothes. "Officer, I'm complying with all lawful orders, but I'm also exercising my constitutional right to understand why I'm being detained." "Constitutional rights?" Morrison laughed harshly. "You think you're some kind of lawyer? Out of the car, now. Last warning. Close." That's when Dr. Chen made a decision that would change everything. She calmly reached for her phone and started recording. "For the record," she said clearly, "this is Dr. Sarah Chen. It's 2:19 a.m. on Interstate 64. I'm being ordered from my vehicle by an officer who has not provided justification for this stop." Morrison's face flushed red. "Turn that phone off. You're interfering with a police investigation." "This is a legal recording of a public servant performing public duties," Dr. Chen replied, her voice never rising above conversational level. "I have every right to document this interaction." Morrison had reached his breaking point. In his mind, this civilian, this woman, was challenging his authority, questioning his judgment, making him look weak. He yanked open her car door. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with a police officer." Dr. Chen stepped out slowly, hands visible, recording everything. What specific actions constitute obstruction, officer? I've complied with all lawful orders and am simply exercising my First Amendment rights. Morrison grabbed her phone. Evidence, he snapped, dropping it into his jacket pocket. What happened next would be captured on Morrison's own body camera. The camera he'd forgotten was recording because he was so used to his complaints disappearing that he'd stopped worrying about documentation. Dr. Chen was handcuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car. No breathalyzer, no field sobriety test, no search warrant for the vehicle, just a woman arrested for asking questions that Morrison didn't want to answer. At the station, Dr. Chen was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, mugshot, the whole procedure. She submitted to everything without resistance, answering questions with "yes, sir" and "no, sir," while maintaining perfect posture even in handcuffs. It wasn't until the desk sergeant ran her name through the system that the first red flag appeared. "Detective Morrison," Sergeant Williams called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "You need to see this." Morrison walked over, still feeling satisfied about putting another uppity citizen in their place. "What?" Williams pointed at his computer screen. "Her security clearance level. I've never seen anything this high outside of federal facilities." Morrison squinted at the screen. "So she works for the government. Big deal. Half of McLean works for the government." "Detective," Williams said carefully, "this isn't works for the government. This is works at levels that require congressional approval. Who exactly did you arrest?" For the first time that night, Morrison felt a twinge of unease. But his ego was stronger than his caution. "I don't care if she works for the president. She resisted lawful orders." That's when Captain Rodriguez arrived at the station for his usual late-night check-in and saw Dr. Chen sitting calmly in the holding area. "Williams," Rodriguez said slowly, "why is there a woman in a $3,000 suit sitting in our drunk tank at 3 a.m.? Morrison arrested her for obstruction during a traffic stop." Rodriguez looked at the paperwork, then at Dr. Chen, then back at Morrison. "Ray, please tell me you had probable cause for this arrest." She was being difficult. "Questioning my authority. Recording me illegally." Recording you isn't illegal, Ray, and questioning authority isn't a crime." Rodriguez was getting a bad feeling about this. What was the initial reason for the stop? Morrison hesitated. "Suspicious vehicle, out-of-state plates." "That's not a violation, Ray. That's not even suspicious." By 4 a.m., the situation had escalated beyond the station level. Dr. Chen had made her one phone call, not to a lawyer, but to a number that connected directly to a Pentagon duty officer. Within minutes, calls were being made to the Richmond police chief, the mayor's office, and the Department of Justice. Captain Rodriguez found himself on the phone with people whose titles he'd only seen in newspapers, all asking very polite but very pointed questions about why a distinguished federal employee was sitting in a jail cell without cause. "Release her immediately," Rodriguez told Morrison, "and pray this doesn't become an incident." But it was already too late for that. Dr. Chen was released at 4:47 a.m. with profuse apologies from Captain Rodriguez and a promise of full investigation. She accepted her belongings with the same calm dignity she'd maintained throughout the ordeal, signed the release forms, and walked out into the dawn light. Morrison thought it was over. He'd been wrong about many things that night, but this was his biggest mistake yet. 3 days later, the story broke nationally. "Pentagon official illegally arrested in traffic stop," read the headline in the Washington Post. The article detailed Dr. Chen's distinguished military career, 25 years of service, multiple deployments, expert in counterintelligence operations, recipient of the Defense Superior Service Medal. But more damaging was the body camera footage that had been subpoenaed and released. Morrison's own camera had captured every moment of the illegal stop, the baseless arrest, and his increasingly aggressive behavior toward a woman who had done nothing but ask reasonable questions. The footage went viral within hours. #Justice for Dr. Chen began trending on social media. Legal experts appeared on news shows explaining how the stop violated multiple constitutional protections. Civil rights organizations called for Morrison's termination and federal investigation. Morrison watched his career implode in real time. Within a week, he was suspended pending investigation. Within 2 weeks, he was terminated. Within a month, the FBI had opened a civil rights investigation into his conduct. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Morrison and the Richmond Police Department. Not for money, she donated any settlement to civil rights organizations, but to create legal precedent and ensure accountability. The case went to trial 6 months later, and Morrison found himself sitting across a courtroom from a woman whose credentials made his badge look like a toy. Dr. Chen's attorney laid out her background for the jury.
Graduate of West Point. PhD in International Relations from Georgetown. 25 years of military service, including classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Current position requiring the highest levels of security clearance. A woman who had literally risked her life for her country, being treated like a criminal by someone who had never served anyone but himself.
Morrison's attorney tried to argue that he was just doing his job, following procedures, protecting public safety. But when the body camera footage played in court, showing Morrison's escalating aggression toward a completely compliant citizen, those arguments fell apart. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: violation of civil rights, false imprisonment, abuse of authority. Morrison was ordered to pay $150,000 in damages and was permanently barred from working in law enforcement. But the real victory came 6 months later when the Richmond Police Department, under pressure from the federal investigation, completely overhauled their training and accountability procedures. The Dr. Chen protocols became a model for departments nationwide on how to prevent abuse of authority. Morrison lost everything: his job, his pension, his reputation. He tried to appeal, tried to find work in private security, tried to rebuild. But in the age of social media, his name was permanently linked to the viral video of him arresting a war hero for asking questions. Dr. Chen returned to her work at the Pentagon, where she was promoted to senior executive service, the civilian equivalent of a general officer. She never sought publicity, never gave interviews about the incident. She simply returned to serving her country with the same quiet dignity she had shown that night on Interstate 64. Years later, when asked about the incident at a military leadership conference, Dr. Chen said something that became widely quoted in law enforcement training. "Authority without accountability is just intimidation with a badge. Real leadership, whether in military uniform or police uniform, means being strong enough to be questioned, confident enough to explain your actions, and humble enough to admit when you're wrong." The case became a turning point in discussions about police accountability and constitutional rights. Law schools used it as a textbook example of civil rights violations. Police academies showed the body camera footage as training on what not to do. Morrison became a cautionary tale about what happens when someone mistakes a uniform for unlimited power. Dr. Chen became a symbol of how quiet dignity and knowledge of rights can overcome even the most aggressive abuse of authority. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or explosive revelations. This story ends with something more powerful: proof that in America, no badge makes anyone untouchable, and no citizen, regardless of race, gender, or background, has to accept being bullied by those sworn to protect and serve. The woman Detective Morrison thought he could intimidate turned out to be someone who had faced down actual enemies of the United States. His bluster and aggression, which had worked on countless other citizens, meant nothing to someone who had spent decades in situations where real courage was required. In the end, Morrison learned the hardest lesson of all: respect cannot be demanded, authority must be earned, and when you abuse power, eventually you meet someone who has real power to hold you accountable. So now I ask you, have you ever witnessed abuse of authority? Have you seen someone use their position to intimidate others? Share your story in the comments below. Because here at Mysterious Human Stories, we believe that every badge comes with responsibility, every uniform comes with duty, and every citizen deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of who they are or where they come from. Thank you for watching. If this story reminded you that true strength comes from character, not costume, subscribe and share. Help us keep these stories alive because accountability matters, justice matters, and the truth always finds a way to surface. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, never judge someone by their appearance. Never assume your authority is unlimited. And never forget that real heroes often wear civilian clothes.